Good evening, everybody. The Music Fan is back, bringing smiles to the faces, knowledge to the people, and most importantly, music to the masses. And I am here to continue my 2020 recap. Now, I do know that this has been going not as smoothly as I planned. The videos have been coming out slowly and not necessarily steadily. I do apologize about that. Some of these videos have taken longer to edit, as well as I've just been super busy with work, so I just haven't had the right amount of time to just get through this really quickly. But fear not, I still plan on putting all of this out. I thank you for your patience, and I hope that it pays off in the end. I'm really excited to still talk about my top 50 list. There's a lot of really awesome albums that I haven't gotten to yet. If you've enjoyed the honorable mentions, if you've enjoyed my 50 through 41, then I think you're going to like the rest of this list. So, again, thank you for your patience, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of this. But two things I want to get done quickly. First off, I found out recently that I probably haven't been using this microphone right for the last year, or last year and change. I've listened to one of my favorite podcasts recently, and they were talking about changing microphone settings on your computer, and as much as I've been doing this, I never once thought about doing that to my own computer. So, this is probably the first, actually I'll probably confirm that this is the first video that will be using my microphone in the right way. So please let me know what the sound settings are like if you enjoyed that, or if there are things that you would like me to change, because now I'm finally being able to experiment with my microphone the right way. And then second, on a little bit more of a somber note, but one that I wanted to talk about real quick. For some of you who do know, a legend in the jazz field passed away last week by the name of Chick Corea. And, I don't usually do this, but I want to talk about him because he had a little bit of an impact on me in terms of the jazz field. Those of you who don't know, I think I've talked about it before, but I went to college for vocal jazz. I graduated in 2014 from UMass Amherst. One of the coolest experiences that I got to have was being able to see Chick Corea and Gary Burton in concert. I was able to see for free because I was a music student. I've been able to see pretty awesome array of talent. I saw the San Francisco Jazz Collective as they were going over their own interpretations of Stevie Wonder. I've been able to see Herbie Hancock, which unfortunately I fell asleep partway through just because I've been doing so many all-nighters in college. But from what my friends told me, I didn't really miss much because he only really played 7 songs in an hour and a half. Still, pretty cool concert from what I remember. But the coolest one that I got to see was Chick Corea and Gary Burton when they were dropping their album in 2012 or 2013, Hot House, which was honestly also one of my top 50 from that year. I've always been a huge fan of progressive music like Tool, Haken, Dream Theater, Caligula's Horse, the list goes on. But I never really dove into as much modal chordal progressions, or at least I didn't understand it as much when I was in college. Honestly, when I got into UMass Amherst, I was not necessarily literate when it came to music theory, but I didn't know it as well as I do now. But one of the cooler people that I got to check out with that was Chick Corea. In his earlier years, he had some more straightforward songs, but most of his stuff was always modal, and it was super cool to hear that work. It made for these interesting and beautiful color palettes that you don't usually hear in straightforward jazz. It got me really into stuff like that. And then Brad Mehldau and other modal jazz pianists. When I heard that he had passed away, it didn't hit as hard as some of the people that are my inspirations that I've lost. Chris Cornell, Scott Whelan, and Chester Bennington. Those were more of my time. But it was still a moment where I was, I had to pause and I had to be like, wow, he's passed away. It was awesome to get to see him live in concert. It was awesome to get to know his work, and I'm very thankful that I've been able to listen to his stuff and be able to interpolate new ideas that I would never have even thought about in music. If you are someone who has never checked out Chick Corea, I have a few suggestions that I think you would like. The first one is Windows. It is one of his more straightforward songs in terms of like chord progressions, but there's still some beautiful modal twists and turns that make it really interesting to listen to. And then, of course, Crystal Silence, a gorgeous, gorgeous song. More on the minor side. I was able to do an awesome vocal jazz arrangement with that song, and it was really cool to be able to perform that. I've also done a project on him, and it was so cool to like look into his music and his backstory. Honestly, just check out a lot of his work. It's definitely worth it. It usually tends to be on the more progressive side, especially in his later years, but definitely worth a listen. And of course, check out his work with Gary Burton as well. Gary Burton is a jazz vibraphonist, and his work with Gary Burton on Hot House is awesome and definitely one to check out. If nothing else, check out their arrangement of Eleanor Rigby. It's super, super cool. Thank you for giving me a second to talk about one of my jazz heroes. There's no better way of segueing, so I guess it's time to get back on track with this video. So tonight we're going to be going over 40 through 31. Like I've said, I got 2 ground rules. Number 1, this list is album based, it is not singles based. Singles do make good parts of an album, but it does not make the full entire album. Bear in mind, I am grading on the whole entire scale and not one particular song. And second, just because you don't see one of your favorite albums on here doesn't mean that I don't like it. 1, it could be from 50 to 41. Number 2, it could be in any of my honorable mentions. Or 3, it could be higher up on this list. Or 4, I just may not have had enough time to check out that album. I listened to over 200 albums. There's still stuff that I missed. So if you don't see it, let me know what your favorite stuff is, and be constructive. If you want to criticize, be constructive. Give me recommendations of stuff for me to check out. There is a chance I've checked it out and I just didn't like it as much. That is nothing against your tastes. This is just my taste. This is just my opinion. You're going to be seeing something kind of interesting with 40 through 31. It's going to start off more beautiful, and then it's going to get a little bit more intense as we go on. Enough dilly-dallying, let's get on to it. Starting off with number 40, we have Jason Isbell in the 400 unit with Reunions. I enjoyed Jason Isbell's last album, but to be completely honest, I think this is head and shoulders better than his previous album. The biggest reason why is because it is more of a cohesive unit. I really like the song If We Were Vampires, and I still think that's his best song. However, this album just is a lot more solid in terms of its listenability as well as its topics. Starting off with What I've Done to Help, really solid, sad opener with really good energy to get you into the rest of this album. Dreamsicle is a song about someone's estranged family where the son is stuck with a mom and dad who are no longer really loving each other, where the dad isn't always there, and trying to grow up and live a normal life with that. Only Children is looking at the past and yearning for those times. I love the power of Overseas. Running with Our Eyes Closed is a little bit more whimsical. Not necessarily my favorite song, but still a lovely song. Be Afraid has so much power in there. Something that I didn't really hear on the previous album, just like Overseas. And then you end with some very beautiful songs. St. Peter's Autograph, talking about doing the best that you can to make someone happy, even though they are hurting inside, probably because they've lost somebody, and trying to fill that void for somebody. And then Letting You Go is also a lovely ender, talking about raising a kid and seeing them through all the steps of life, knowing that at the end, when they have to give them up, that's going to be the hardest part for them. There's this lovely section where it's talking about wanting to be there and see the relationship that this person is going through. You can only be there for the wedding and for little parts, but you would love to be able to see this person being happy with somebody else other than their parents. Overall, super solid. And real quick side note, my top 50 is solid, but I would say the Enter Shikari and then the top 40, that's where everything kind of stands out. I basically had a bar where Enter Shikari was the one where if it was better than Enter Shikari, that I knew for certain it was going to be in the top 50. So even though this is number 40, make no mistake, this is still a very solid album and one that you need to check out if you love Jason Isbell or love singer-songwriter or just love really good songwriting in general. Keeping on with the singer-songwriter, number 39, we have Laura Marlin and Song for Our Daughter. This is also super gorgeous and really, really good songwriting. This album, for the most part, lyrically is talking about a failing relationship and one that is failing because of Laura Marling's time in the celebrity, as well as trying to balance being a mother, being a wife, and being a celebrity. Now, most of this is fictional, but it's a very interesting concept. One that we've definitely heard before, but the way that a lot of this is just written is very refreshing. And also the music, for the most part, is also super good. A lot of this reminds me in a way of Ways Blood from 2019. A little bit more folky, but not as much electronic work. This one focuses heavily more on guitar work, and it just shines through. Also, a lot of really beautiful harmony work. Ones that come to mind are the harmonies on Held Down during the verse parts. Strange Girl has a lovely beat. I really love the melody line, especially the intonation from Laura Marling on there. Fortune is absolutely beautiful with its guitar part. And then The End of the Affair is also really good storytelling wise. The way that Laura Marling comes off sometimes in terms of just how she speaks the lines instead of sings them adds a little bit more emphasis and weight to these lyrics. There are some parts that I'm not as interested in. For You is kind of sappy as an ender, but overall, another really great singer-songwriter album, one that you should check out if you are into that vibe. Definitely worth a spot on my top 50. Number 38, we have Fleet Foxes with Shore. I was not a huge fan of Crack Up from a few years ago. I really wanted to like it because I've liked a lot of what Fleet Foxes does. You know, I've never checked out Hopelessness Blues, which is something that I definitely should, but White Winter Himmel, that album, I really enjoyed. I see why people really enjoy that Baroque-ish art, indie folk. Beautiful. The atmospheric nature of a lot of the arrangements, of a lot of the vocals, the harmonies are always really interesting. I really wanted to get into Crack Up, but I just couldn't. There was just some parts in there that just didn't feel interesting or didn't feel like it went anywhere. I was super excited though to check out Shore because I've heard so many good things about it, and to be honest, it's one of the more beautiful albums that I heard all year. The cool thing about it too is there's a little bit more up-tempo stuff. It's a little bit more on the art indie rock scene, folk scene. It just has a little bit more energy to it than their typical stuff, and because of that, it makes for a breath of fresh air for them. It also takes away a little bit of the complexity of some of their stuff, but not in a way that is like super noticeable or super missed. I think Waiting in Waist High Water is a beautiful opener and sets the tone for the rest of this album. I love the power of Can I Believe You. I love the beauty of Jara. I love the simplicity and the floatiness of Featherweight. I absolutely love the chord progression and energy of Maestranza, which I believe that's how you say it. Young Man's Game is also super fun. Most of this album is super beautiful and just a great listen all the way through. Yes, there are some bits and pieces that, I don't like as much, but honestly, it's a great bounce back album from Fleet Foxes, and it makes me want to listen to Hopelessness Blues because apparently it's even better than that. I'm really happy to go back to Fleet Foxes, and I'm really curious to see what they do next. Alright, number 37. I'm cheating and double dipping on this one, but you'll understand why. It is 9 Inch Nails with Ghost 5 Together and Ghost 6 Locusts. I've already reviewed this a long time ago, but I'm just going to go through it a little bit quickly. I never was a huge fan of the original 4 Ghosts. In terms of 9 Inch Nails discography, it just didn't really resonate with me as much as with Teeth or The Downward Spiral or Fragile. But man, this time around, especially when it came out, it was sorely needed. Did it still hit the highs now as it did earlier in the year? No, but when this came out, like right in the middle of the pandemic, it was something that was just really super cool to listen to. Both of these albums are like yin and yang when it comes to their feels. You have Together, which is a little bit more ambient, I guess, a lot more long form songs that have sparse movement, but when it does, it is super purposeful. I love the contrast of Together and Apart, where Together is much more consonant, while as Apart takes that same melody idea and turns it more sinister. Most of this album is super sparse, yet super beautiful with its arrangements. When you get to Still Right Here, that's when it gets to a little bit more active, which bridges this album with the other album. Locust is much more experimental, a little bit more sinister, a little bit more dissonant, a lot more movement with songs, and a lot more uses of different sounds. For example, The Cursed Clock, as you can imagine, has a ticking clock in the background. Run Like Hell has this just amazing build of tension that makes it feel like someone's chasing you, while you have some sort of like melodic percussion that just works so well behind it. You have the Worriment Waltz that has some flugelhorn in there. Another Crashed Car, which has the sound of a car battery not clicking. You have just so many more songs on here that feel sinister, that feel uneasy, especially when you get to the last song, Almost Dawn, which at one point has a heartbeat in there. This one contrasts so well against Together, and it makes you feel like you're looking at both sides of how you're feeling during this pandemic when you're isolated. The hopes of being together at one point, and the fears and the worry of just feeling like you're trapped inside everything. It doesn't necessarily hit the highs as when it did before, but it is certainly two albums that you need to check out if you just like really good atmospheric and ambient music. Be warned, they are both pretty long. I would say the first one is a little bit over 70 minutes, and then the second one's a little bit over 80 minutes. So you're looking at least 2.5 hours worth of material, but still worth it, at least in my opinion. All right, so now we are moving away from the beautiful and more into the heavy. And I'm just going to warn you, numbers 36 through 30 are going to be all in the metal and progressive metal field. I didn't necessarily plan it that way, it just shook up that way. So if you're not a fan of this stuff, I would say this is where we part for now. I hope you at least enjoyed the first part of this video and come back for number 29. But, if you've been looking to get into this field, give these albums a chance. Hear me out for what I have to say on these, because even though they are all based around the same field, there's a lot of variance in these albums. If you are sticking around, thank you so much. And we're going to get into number 36, and that is Pyramids with Epitaph. A lot of these next albums are actually going to be coming off the recommendations from sonicperspective.com. If you are interested in any of these, definitely check out their reviews on this. I'm just going to go over really quickly. Pyramids is one that I've heard about for the first time on their list, and I'm really happy that I checked it out. The best way I can describe it is power metal. What I mean by that is it definitely has progressive tendencies, but it hits heavier, kind of like with Sons of Apollo or Pyramid Theorem. It is a little bit more simplistic. There are a lot of choruses that feel a little bit poppier, like Particle or Birds of Prey or Knights in Shining Armor. I will also say something that might turn you away is it does feel a little bit over the top of cheese at times, which makes sense because it's power metal. However, if those two things don't push you away, this is a really solid outing. I really enjoy a lot of what this album does. It's just really, really, really fun to listen to, in my opinion. I will say there are some times where the cheese factor goes over the top. One example is The Time Traveler, the last song on the album, which is 12 minutes long. Time travel in progressive metal albums, it's not the first time that we heard it, and it's certainly not going to be the last, but if you can get past that, super fun. Also really cool on here is Transcendence has the lead singer of Unleash the Archers guest starring on that song. I've talked about Unleash the Archers a little bit with Apex, I want to say, or if I haven't, check out Unleash the Archers, because that's also another awesome band, and you should check out this one. all really good music and definitely worth a spot on my top 50. Going from a power metal group to a little bit more of a full-on progressive, we have Vulcan with Technotura. This group comes from Sweden, and this is actually one that I was recommended by from Matt O'Leary's top albums of 2020. Definitely check out his work. He is also another YouTuber, and he does pretty cool album reviews, so definitely check him out as well. I was surprised to see that his number one album was a progressive metal album, but I can see why with this. This album is super diverse in its usage of the progressive feel. You have some songs that feel a little bit more sinister, like a Tool or a Soen song. You have stuff that's a little bit more guitar heavy and just vibrant with its guitar work, like an Opeth, which makes sense. Opeth, also another Swedish band. You can see the similarities there, but I would say the coolest thing about it is this whole entire album just hits hard with its progressive leanings, and it's just super diverse. You also get some songs that have a little bit more of electronic work in there. The drumming sticks out, the vocalist sticks out. The only problem that I have, and it goes back to the same thing with Tricot and the same thing with Lido Pimenta. Some songs on here go all Swedish. Once you get past the first 4 songs, you get tracks 5 through 9 that have Swedish names or Swedish lyrics. Not that that's a bad thing, but if I have to make the comparison, I'm going to compare it back to what happened with Opeth last year and with In Cauda Veniem. The cool thing about what they did is that they had one album that was fully English and then another one that was fully Swedish. I don't understand why they didn't do it here, and because of that, there are some tracks that, as much as I love the melodies and as much as I love the arrangement, I have a hard time connecting to them because of the lyrics. So that's the only reason why it's dragged down. Honestly, it probably should be higher, but it's just those tracks in the middle that are just a little bit harder for me to connect to without the English lyrics. But still, definitely check this album out. If you love varied progressive at its finest, in my opinion, it's worth a listen. I can see why Matt O'Leary found this to be his number one album of 2020. Going back to the well of a little bit more power metal and speed metal, this time around we are looking at, with number 34, DGM and Tragic Separation. This one is another one that I found out from Sonic Perspective, and my god, this was so much fun. It is, again, a little bit on the more simplistic side, kind of like a little bit more Dream Theater-esque, but just faster and heavier. I just love most of this album. It just hits so hard and so fast. There's so many cool chordal and counterpoint ideas. I just love a lot of the guitar work. Yeah, it does get a little bit flashy at times, especially with the lead singer as well, but man, it's just such a fun ride. Surrender has such a fun chorus idea as well as the pre-chorus idea. I love the chord progression there. Tragic Separation is a little bit different with the piano work at the beginning, but then it gets into just hard and heavy hitting. One of the best choruses on the album, in my opinion. It does start to slow down a little bit in terms of listenability with Stranded and Lands of Sorrow, but at the end of the day, it's just a super fun ride. The only thing I also don't really like is Curtain as an ending song. I understand it's like closing the curtain, but after such an intense ride, I feel like it's a little bit of a letdown to end with a song like that. But still, if you're looking for a lot of fun, speed-ish metal and power metal, but if you're looking for a little bit of like speed and power metal, this is definitely up your alley. It's a lot of fun and definitely worth a listen. Number 33, we're going into a little bit more instrumental progressive and more guitar work with Covet and Technicolor. This is a really cool band. I got to see them live at a concert venue in Boston. I can't remember off the top of my head where it was, but it was the same concert as I got to see Val, Maya, and Periphery. And this was the opener, and this was super cool to take a look at. It's all along the same lines as Polyphia, with its instrumental guitar work, a lot of precision, a lot of really interesting lines. But the difference between Polyphia and this band is Covet does a little bit more progressive ideas with the different time signatures, and it's also a little bit more beautiful to listen to. Of course, there are some heavier hitting songs like Atreyu and Nero and Ares. The longer songs are usually a little bit more on the heavier side of progressive. But there's also some very beautiful songs like Parrot in Odessa and even Pre-Dawn, which is a little bit weird at times though, with the tuning down a little bit more on a quarter tone than actually a half tone. Overall, really solid all the way through. The only things that I'm not a really huge fan of are the songs that have the vocals. Kind of like what my issue with New Levels, New Devils, I want to say, from Polyphia from a couple of years ago. When I hear an album so cool instrumentally, it kind of drags it down when you hear songs that have vocals in them. I will say on that end though, at least the music is interesting this time around in comparison to the Polyphia album. Crash Thompson gave this a high review as well. I'm just so happy that, one, I was able to check out this band again, because I was like, wow, I didn't even remember this band until someone said it. And I'm glad that, again, like a smaller band I get to check out, and it's a really solid album. If you want to support smaller bands like this is definitely one to check out if you're looking for that vibe, that chill-ish progressive guitar vibe, but also one that hits a little bit harder at times. It just has some very beautiful arrangements. All right, number 32, we have Stardust with Strangers. My first dive into a Middle Eastern progressive metal band. I believe they are from Israel, I want to say. And man, this is a super cool album. At first, when I heard one of the teaser tracks, I was like, didn't really see the appeal. It seemed like stuff that I've already heard before. But going into it and listening to it fully, this album and this band does The Astonishing from Dream Theater better than Dream Theater. And what I mean by that is this album is a little bit more on the musical theater side at times with the lead singer's vocals and with some of the arrangements. You could definitely hear this being on a Disney movie. There are times where I just sat and listened and I was like, wow, I could definitely see this as like Frozen or Moana. That is like such a huge accomplishment for a progressive band. There are so many beautiful vocal lines and some jazzy stuff as well. The intro song is kind of like the same thing with the intro song for The Astonishing, where it takes all the melodic ideas that you're going to hear from the rest of the album and just puts it into one 6-minute song. And then you get to Break the Ice, which is such an awesome chorus line. There's a lot of really awesome chorus lines. Stranger, Tantibus 2, Concrete Cages, Under I really love because it also has a little bit more of a jazzy flair at times. And that's the other cool thing about this album, is there are a lot of songs that bridge the like more musical theater verses with a super awesome chorus, and it's because of the lead singer's voice. She has such a beautiful range, and she can also bring out the power when she needs to, and hell, she even screams as well. This is a really cool first listen for me in terms of this band, and man, I'm really curious to see some of their other stuff. I can't say this is like a perfect album for someone to get into progressive for the first time, but this is a really good stepping point that isn't like super rhythmically challenging and has a little bit more, not necessarily mainstream approaches, but more musical theater approaches. That would definitely help you get into this field. I think it's a really solid first step for people who want to get into progressive. So if you haven't been able to get into progressive just because it's a little bit too confusing at times, I think this would be a good album for you. And in general, it's just a really solid progressive album. I'm glad to check this out. And finally, to finish up this section of my top 50 list, we have Protest the Hero with Palimpsest. This is my first dive into Protest the Hero, but I've heard of this band for years. And I'm just glad that I finally checked it out because, man, I don't know what the rest of the albums are like, but if it's like this, fuck, I need to get into this band. The first thing I can say about this album is it's just so much chaotic intensity. When I hear these guitar lines, the first thing that I think sometimes is either like At the Drive-In or the Mars Volta or even Codeine Cambria. Just super intense, super all over the place. Makes for some really interesting arrangements. The lead singer, I'm still a little bit iffy on his voice, and from what my brother said, I understand why. He's a little bit out there with his vocals. Still brings a lot of intensity that a lot of these arrangements need, and because of that, these songs become absolute whirlwinds, from like The Canary to From the Sky to All Hands and Soliloquy and Reverie, which are my two favorite songs on this album. Super intense and just super in your face. The other really cool part about this album is it's a concept album about looking at the darker sides of American history. This band is from, I believe, Canada. So they're taking a look at American history and the stuff that people don't always talk about. Whether it's talking about like some of the perils from Amelia Earhart's ride on From the Sky, to the story of Babyface Nelson on Soliloquy, and then his partner after getting out of jail on Reverie, and like what he's going to do and just the prison system in general. Little Snakes is talking about the way that American colonists treated Indians. We have Gardenias, which is about a silent movie actress who famously threw herself off of the Hollywood sign to her death. A cool thing about that song is there's a lot of alliteration with H's on there to emphasize the Hollywood part of it. Just a lot of really interesting and darker lyrics, but also parts of hope, especially on Rip It at the end, talking about making America great again, but looking at the past and realizing that it was already great to begin with, and just honing in on what made this America great. Also, the interludes, in my opinion, are also beautiful as well. I really, really love Mountainside. Just a beautiful interlude before you get into Gardenias. Is it my favorite prog album? No, because we got some more on the way, but it was just a blast to listen to, and I gotta get into more Protest to Hero. I'm glad to have checked this out. Alright, so that is 40 through 31. Man, this was also another long video, but like I said before, I didn't get a chance to talk about all these albums earlier this year, so I just gotta get a lot of this out. I hope that you enjoyed this part of the list. Let me know what you like or hate about this part of the list. Let me know some of your albums that you enjoyed from 2020, some of your favorites. If you like this video, of course, give this a like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. That way I know that you enjoy what I'm doing and want to see more of this in the future, as well as so that you can see the rest of this list, because this was a really solid chunk, but there's 30 more albums to go. That's it for now. I gotta rest my voice. I'll see you later for numbers 30 through 21. This has been The Music Fan, and I'm signing off.